Mark Zuckerberg, in an incredible moment yesterday, was forced by Senator Josh Hawley to stand up during a hearing and turn to the victims of harassment and abuse on Facebook and make an apology. It's a fascinating moment even at the most surface level when it comes to public relations. What a no-win situation for Mark Zuckerberg. Let's discuss that and many other things going on in the world of entrepreneurship and tech with Trung Phan. He is the writer at a Substack called SatPost. Go subscribe. He's also built the AI app, Bearly.AI. He is a business writer at Workweek, and you can follow him on X at Trung T Fan. And he's been here before on the Will Kane Show. What's up, Trung?
Thanks for having me, Will. I'm wearing a hat today because I couldn't match your hair. So I saw your hair briefly. I'm like, I got to put on a hat. I'm not going to be able to play.
Is that right? You're always welcome with compliments here on the Will Kane Show. Hey, what did you think about this moment? I mean, there's the substance of it all in the hearing, but one of the first things that occurred to me, Trung, is like, as Mark Zuckerberg stood up and turned around and the cameras just surrounded him, like what a PR loss for Mark Zuckerberg. But had he not done it as well, if he'd have just declined to apologize, what a loss for Mark Zuckerberg is, had he chosen that path. I don't know that there was anything he could do to win.
Yeah, I think those setups in general, these congressional hearings, especially when they're framed with these yes-no questions, there really is a kind of lose-lose situation. And I think you've seen over the last couple of years, when I remember distinctly when Jeff Bezos stepped down, like one of the jokes on Twitter, which it was at the time, was he just doesn't want to deal with these congressional hearings anymore. So Andy Jassy is now the CEO of Amazon, for example. And then about a decade ago, Larry Page and Sergey Brin left Google. Sundar Pichai is the new CEO. And a bit of that is like the CEO is the hot seat. And a lot of these guys are so rich already. They're like, do we want to deal with this hot seat? Whereas Zuckerberg, still a founder, one of the still founder CEOs of these large companies. And for a while, it was Sheryl Sandberg, the former CEO, who left as CEO and now stepped down as chair on the board. So Zuck is back in the hot seat, right? And it was a no-win situation. He said, and the whole premise of the hearing was just difficult because of the subject matter. But they had to answer questions, and that's what it came down to.
I want to believe that Mark Zuckerberg is not tolerant of the kind of stuff that he had to apologize for, and he said that to the extent that he could apologize, that it could be heard. He said something like, this is why we're working on this stuff. But I guess it's just really hard to look at not just Meta, not just Facebook, but all of these social media platforms and say, well, whether or not you tolerate it, it's happening on your platform. At the same time, you're cracking down on so mmany other kinds of speech that you take as a real priority. It's a little bit like what I talked about a minute ago in terms of priorities when it comes to the Department of Justice. Like, we all know the topics that right now I could get in trouble for on any one of those platforms. When I say in trouble, I'd be flagged, I'd be demonetized, I'd be censored. And they're pretty good at coming after you for talking about things that they don't want you talking about, but they can't crack down on the stuff that they had to talk about in a hearing yesterday in Congress.
I think to your point, there's this perception where certain speech is being, like you said, cracked down on, and then the most important subject matter for any family or an individual, underage children being trafficked or being put in these situations. I think necessarily, I don't know if the percentage-wise, Zuck himself didn't talk about the percentages, right? I think Ted Cruz called him out for not knowing the exact numbers of cases that were done. But to Meta's credit, they spend about $4 or $5 billion a year on trust and safety, which is multiples more than the rest of the industry. And granted,
I'd be curious how much of that budget is devoted to that censorship regime that we just referenced, though, versus the things he had to account for yesterday in Congress.
Well, the way I kind of look at it from 50,000-foot level is if you're onboarding humanity onto the internet, which is effectively what Meta has done, they have 300 billion monthly users. That's half of humanity. No, that's a third of humanity and basically 3/4 of internet users. You're going to get all of that, right? Like everything that's involved with humanity, which is the good, the bad, and the truly awful. And I just don't know if there's a true comparison point. Like, what are we comparing them to? Like, Facebook is essentially a one of one, right? There's no one else that are overlooking. Even the Chinese government doesn't look at more than 1.2 billion people. India is the largest population in the world. That's 1.4 billion. They have a very sophisticated tech stack, but even they're about half the size of Facebook. And who knows what's happening in the Indian population, right? There's none of this to excuse Facebook or Zuckerberg's seeming inability to capture a lot of this really bad stuff. But I think the large 50,000 foot is like, we're talking, you've onboarded half of humanity onto this platform. I don't know how difficult, I mean, it's clearly a difficult challenge. I just don't know what the comparison is, if you know what I'm saying. It's like, what are we comparing it to, which is often something that needs to be done.
Well, okay, this isn't a direct comparison, but this is something that is somewhat related. Transitioning stories. California is often the canary in the coal mine on regulation and laws, trying out new things to create their utopia that forces everybody to move out of the state. But one of the things they're talking about now is all the cars are getting smart cars, AI increasingly integrated into cars, whatever it may be. And what it is going to open the door for is the ability for the government to regulate speed, essentially. And here's what's interesting about this to me, Trung. Look, I'm inherently libertarian conservative by nature. I don't want more laws. But you know what I have trouble with? I have trouble with formulating the argument against this development. In other words, okay, speeding is against the law. That's a democratically elected thing, right? We've decided. But it's kind of unenforceable outside of isolated cops out there with radar guns, or now they have. I got a ticket in Spain last year, which I got through the mail. I didn't know I got a ticket. It must have been through video technology or something like that. Somewhere.
I got one from Italy.
Radar.
They need to
put
the budgets back up, so they're hitting up all the tourists now.
That's seriously. That's exactly what's happened. But I mean, I guess theoretically, the way they implement this technology is, whatever, you're driving a Tesla or any other car now where they can monitor your speed actively. They could issue you a ticket. The minute you go 60 and a 55, you could be receiving a ticket. But if I'm supposed to be obeying the law, I'm like, instinctually, I hate this, Trung. Instinctually, I hate it. But I'm having trouble saying, why should it not be the case? I know there are times you should be able to speed, emergencies, or whatever it may be. And that would be an more extreme measure if they actually stopped you from speeding, instead of issuing you a ticket. But I'm kind of having trouble accessing my libertarian argument against this.
I see where you're going with this. So let me help you cross the chasm. All right. So
okay.
In this world, we're assuming where everything's monitored on your car. What you mentioned, if they stop you speeding, well, that's the most dangerous thing in the world. So let's hope they don't do that, right? If you're going to slam a car down without the driver's knowledge, right. It's going 80, right. 70 or 80. That's not good. But let me give you a carrot for the stick you proposed, because I know you're having difficulty wrapping your head around this. You're like, as a libertarian, I hate the idea that they can do this. But, there's a benefit then. The benefit that people have been talking about for years is if you can monitor a driver's basically day-to-day safety record, they can get a discount on insurance, right? So that's basically the carrot to the stick you're proposing. The carrot is, hey, you're going to get a financial benefit here. We're going to reduce your premiums for not being an asshole on the roads. I don't know if I was allowed to say that, but I don't know if this time. It's too late now. Right. But I don't know if if that carrot is enough to balance out the stick you mentioned. So let me throw that to you. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're still manipulating behavior. I mean, that's the whole nudge philosophy. They're going to use all these other aspects. What I don't like about that is it's turning the private sector into an enforcement mechanism for laws. I don't like that. I don't want the insurance company being, in bed with the government to manipulate my behavior. I don't want the credit card companies monitoring my credit score and coordinating with the government on my allowances through regulation. So, the carrot stick thing isn't actually that persuasive to me. It's more about, should I monitoring me to ensure that I do not break the law? On one hand, I shouldn't be breaking the law. On the other hand, I don't want you monitoring me.
No, I agree with you. That 24/7, like anytime you're on the road, it is super dystopian. But I think you kind of brought up the reality here is the technology is moving at such a pace. And let's just grant that level 5 self-driving does happen. And for anybody that can do napkin math, I think it was 50,000 Americans a year in car crashes die. And if the safety record for self-driving is 5,000. So that you're talking about a 90% drop in car fatalities. Is that trade-off? Let me ask you, is that worth it to you for this basically nonstop surveillance of vehicles? So these are the trade-offs you have to make. And I think that world is coming. So I mean, I'm asking straight up, like, what would you say to that?
Well, I would say that if that is a compelling enough stat, if that stat bears out and it's compelling enough, it should be incentive enough for the individual drivers to make those choices to reduce their likelihood of a fatality. But I'm not sure, not only am I not sure, I am sure I don't want regulated force taking away of independence. If I want to drive myself and I don't want to self-drive, I want the ability to do that. And you leave it to the individual. And I understand that there's two sides of a car wreck, and you could compromise someone else's ability as well. But I'd leave it up to the market. Honestly, that's what I would do. I'd leave that up to the market for people, and trust if that your technology is good enough, people will make the safer decision most of the time.
Right. So there is a world where as long as it's the market deciding that world, the market could walk us into a world of more surveillance, though, right? That's the situation. But you're more comfortable with that happening than a top-down mandate. Understood.
And the truth is, Trung, if these two things go in tension, if there is a car that reduces the likelihood of wrecks, to your point, then the necessity for speed limit laws goes away. So in other words, if my self-driving car can drive incredibly fast and safe at the same time, if it can do 100 and be safe, well, now we're talking about solving of something without regulation.
Yeah, that's right. There you go then. So technology actually can help the case you're making. So I think you just squared your own circle.
Let's talk about this augmented reality with Apple. I'm not a first adopter, Trung. I think you might be. I mean, you certainly you think about the future, you think about technology, and you think about business. And look, I already have one friend who's a big first adopter, and he's like, "This is going to be great. You know, you wear this thing, and now I don't have to look at my phone screen, and it all kind of is there in front of my eyes, and it's embedded within my reality of what I see." On the other hand, by the way, Tim Cook's apparently not using them, so I don't know what kind of endorsement that is of augmented reality.
Well, so just actually, it came out this morning because I actually tweeted yesterday. It's been 7 months since they announced the Vision Pro, and we haven't seen Tim Cook wear the Vision Pro headset. This morning, they basically saved it as a PR standpoint. He did a cover story for Vanity Fair. He's on the cover of Vanity Fair with the Vision Pro goggles on. So first time. Yeah, so they played it well. And listen, Apple is the marketing machine. They're like, let's just say the last. People were asking, people were wondering, because I remember in June last year, everybody noticed immediately, Tim Cook's not wearing these things, right? Because if you remember when Sergey Brin, a decade ago, Google's co-founder, was wearing the Google Glass in the New York subway, people were calling him a glass hole. So Tim Cook's like, I'm not going to be called a glass hole. Like, I'm not letting that happen. I'm not going to let the meme cycle get me. So they basically stretched it out 7 months. Everybody in tech was wondering, when is Tim Cook going to put this on? Because if you remember Steve Jobs, what was Steve Jobs famous for in his keynotes? This dude is pulling things out of the fifth pocket in his jeans. He's holding up the eye, like these iconic photos, right? He's setting up these situations.
But Trung, isn't it true that Steve Jobs didn't want his kids to have an iPhone? Isn't it true like Mark Zuckerberg doesn't want his kids on social media?
Yeah,
and then that's what makes it noteworthy, right? That Tim Cook doesn't put on augmented reality. It's like, why is this all good for us but not for you and your family?
No, I think Tim Cook didn't put it on because he's worried that if he looked like it, he just wouldn't look good in it. I'm being fully honest. Like, I think he was worried about the meme of like the bad product. But to your larger point, let me actually address that, right? Of technologists not letting their kids have technology. So I'll address that by saying it's true. There are a lot of technologists that don't do that. Mark Zuckerberg is one of them. Steve Jobs says he didn't want his child using, like you said, the iPad until a certain age. I feel the same way. Like, I let my kid use an iPad to watch YouTube. I don't let him play games, and I keep him to like 30 minutes or less a day. And well, my funny thing about that is when I wasn't a parent, I would go into restaurants and be the judgiest person ever. Like, I'd see a parent giving their crying kid a phone and be like, I'd never do that. Then as soon as you have a kid, you're just trying to have a nice meal, and the kid's crying, like, yo, just take this phone. Let me have my meal, dude. And so I get the tension, right? So if you're being honest, no one's a perfect parent around that. But the addictive qualities is the problem. It's everything you meant. That's the real problem. And it goes back to the congressional hearing you brought with social, which we didn't even touch on. Is there should be an age limit on social media. children should not be on social media. It's like the cigarette comparison that I think either Cruz or Holly was making. It's 100% true. I
Mhm.
mean, they're not the only ones making it. Lots of people from all sides of the spectrum are making the cigarette comparison. But I think in 50 years, we're going to look back and be like, wow, I can't believe we just let people on social media, their prefrontal cortexes aren't even developed until 25. That's the executive decision-making aspect of your brain. And you're 15 years old and you're being compared to other people. You're seeing what people are presenting the best forms of their life. Everything's comparison. You're getting into negative fights online where the feedback loop is so much quicker than an argument you'd have pre-internet. But you'd have an argument pre-internet. Somebody would say something nasty to you. You'd have all day to stew about it, but then you wouldn't see the person again for another week, and then you don't care anymore. But now on social, you get sucked into these beefs, these online fights that are just taking over your mind and ruining your psychology, right? So I think the large point is yes, social media to just your point about the technology, but the other
Yeah.
aspect of it that you kind of mentioned, if I can talk about the business side, would that be cool?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the business aspect, if you want to look at it from 50,000 foot business aspect for Apple, you have to think about what Apple is. Apple is either the most or second most valuable company in the world, depending on the day. Them and Microsoft are swapping. They're both $3 trillion companies. From their perspective, the iPhone is the greatest consumer product ever. They've sold 2 billion of them. It's made over $2 trillion, and now they're like, we need to find this next cycle, right? So from their perspective, they just need to find something that basically moves the needle for them. So like, if you've ever noticed how the Apple podcast player has sucked for 15 years, it's because even if they made the best podcast player in the world, it would not move the revenue needle. They just don't care. And
You
but
know,
AR/VR could help them.
it's interesting. Companies go through, and this, companies go through essentially two main phases. That's the startup entrepreneurial phase and then the managerial phase. And I don't know anything about Tim Cook that well, but it's clear like Steve Jobs was the entrepreneurial phase. And it's, by the way, two big different personality types. The entrepreneurial startup guy is not the best guy to manage you going forward often. But, you know, I'm reading Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk. And I don't know that Isaacson points this out, but people have pointed out as great of an entrepreneur as he was, Steve Jobs, he kind of did one thing. I mean, a couple of products, one main product, but he did one thing. And most entrepreneurs really kind of do one thing. There's this story right now about, an attempt to cap the pay on Elon Musk. And I don't even know the legal grounding for that. But one thing we can say about Elon Musk, and I had a friend the other day say, no, he's the greatest entrepreneur of all time because he's done it at least, 2 to 4 times. I mean, depending on whatever we contribute to PayPal, to whatever we contribute to X, but undoubtedly SpaceX and Tesla, this is, and then not exactly like little tweak type products, vastly different products that he has pioneered. And now we're trying to sit out here and say, no, he's not worth whatever the pay package is. It is too much according to the powers that be.
No, I agree with you. And I think the line from the Walter Isaacson book is Walter talked to Larry Ellison, the CEO and founder of Oracle. So Larry Ellison is very good friends with Steve Jobs. So and he's very good friends with Elon Musk. So if you wanted somebody to be able to compare those two entrepreneurs, Larry Ellison said for him, the biggest difference with Elon and Steve was, like to your point, Steve Jobs was more of the designer, thinker, creative. Elon's on the factory floors. Elon is on the Tesla factory floor, making sure they can get Model 3 ramped up, right? And it's
Yeah.
Elon's understanding. That's a Tim Cook angle. You brought up that Tim Cook is more the manager. Well, Tim Cook is known for being the supply chain master. So Elon's like basically almost a combination of this creative side and also the nuts and bolts side, which is what Steve Jobs and Tim Cook were. But specifically about talking about the pay package, I'll tell you the crazy thing about that. The guy that brought the case owned 9 shares of Tesla. And but so the guy bringing the case against Elon owned 9 shares. And at the time in 2018, when this was brought to the Tesla shareholders, 80% of them voted yes. And the legal grounds for it that the judge made was essentially that the shareholders did not know, and I think this is a little bit unfair to the shareholders because they probably did know, but they didn't. The judge is saying they didn't know that Elon was so close with the board. I mean, his brother was a board member. For them not to know that
Right.
seems a little bit absurd, right? And that's how they're doing it to claw back. I I think it's crazy because if you read any of the articles in 2018, so Andrew Ross Sorkin, New York Times business, one of the leading business voices for New York Times, he in 2018, I think he wrote an article that literally said, this pay package and the compensation plan, it's so insane, as in these milestones sound so unachievable that this is the most
Right.
ridiculous pay package that ever, like, people were literally laughing and they thought it was a PR stunt to make it. And Elon did, right? I think at the time that Tesla was a $70 billion company, and essentially said if he can get it to $650 billion over by 2030, it unlocks all these tranches of the pay package. 90% of the business media thought it was impossible. People were laughing. So for a person with 9 shares to be able to claw back what 80% of the shareholders agreed with at the time, I mean, by Delaware law, it's possible, but I think it's absurd.
Yeah, you said it well, but no one thought he would be able to do what he would do. So they thought that the pay package was an impossible reach, a shoot for the stars, and they did it. And by the way, that's the way you should reward an entrepreneur. Shoot for the stars, create the impossible, achieve the impossible, and reap the reward. And by the way, when I was talking about how many different things he's done, I forgot about his first company, which I can't remember the name of it, that he sold for,
Zip2.
It's Zip2. And then, by the way, the solar. He's also involved in solar stuff. So, I mean, he's all over the map on different businesses that he's created. Last thing with Trung Phan, something I found fascinating. It was an article up on foxnews.com a few days ago talking about the future of urban environments, the future of big cities, and talking about by 2100 they would lose 20% of their population. And they would move, largely it suggests, to the suburbs. During COVID, we saw a lot of move to rural areas. And the argument now is people have made this like suburbs, what were bright and shiny and new maybe in the 90s and 2000s, have turned into their second, third generation turnover for the home, and they're getting rougher. They're getting rougher neighborhoods, right? And that's how it is, for example, in France, in Paris. Like the suburbs are the slums, and people live with wealth in Paris. It's weird to figure out what's going to happen in America. Like, do the suburbs, like Paris, turn into the slums? But there's also not this big movement for people to move necessarily into an urban environment. So I'm curious what you think, like, how do we live here over the next several generations?
I like that you tossed me a nice softball, easy, low-hanging fruit question at the end there. Well, the best I could draw is my personal anecdotes, and I am hearing a lot more of my friends that have made a permanent move out, and particularly around my age group where you having those first or second child. I think this is, I don't think there is one answer.
To suburbs?
Answer.
Or
suburbs,
rural?
Suburbs, yes, or ex-burbs. Like, they want a bigger house, right? And to your point, some of these properties are a bit older. I mean, remember the growth of the suburbs in America, right? It was tied to post-war economic boom with cars. That was basically the growth of the suburbs, tied directly to the expansion of car ownership. So I think that, I mean, there's a bit of an arbitrage play for people that want bigger homes, right? Like you said, there's a bit more rundown outside. But I mean, nature, it kind of ties back actually to the Vision Pro in a sense. Is we're gone so techy that people just want nature, they want more space. And I don't know if it's a permanent thing, but I definitely see here. Let me answer with this. I think there'll be certain cities that will have the Paris model, and we can guess what they are. It's the top cities in America, right? People will want to do the Paris thing in New York's, in the Bostons and LA's of America. But maybe these second or third tier cities will actually not get that treatment, and people would rather live on the suburbs of a Cleveland, for example, or of a what would be a good second or third tier city in your eyes, where people.
Well, you know what I think. I would drop down another tier. I think the most popular cities of American future are, and I've often said I think this is the perfect size city, are the 200 to 300,000 person city. So it's Waco, Texas, Lubbock, Texas, Knoxville, Tennessee, where nothing's a big commute. You got everything you need in that kind of city, including most of the time at least a regional airport. But you don't have the blight that you often have in huge urban environments. I think that's the sweet spot. Now, the trick is, as people find sweet spots, then it gets to be too big. So
it gets too sweet.
I think that I think it's too sweet. So I think that 200 to 300,000 person city is sort of the future, not utopia, but bright light for city living.
No, I like that. That's a great answer. And so the bifurcation, then the top will never go away, right? In New York, people are always, if you're young, 20, ambitious, you're always going to want to go to New York. But as you get older, as you realize you're never going to own a home in New York, you're going to want to move to Knoxville, Tennessee, to your point.
Yeah. All right, Trung Phan, SatPost. Subscribe to his Substack. Check him out on X. Trung T Phan. He's also got his AI app, Bearly, Bearly.AI. Trung, always great to talk to you, man. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right, bud. We'll see you.